A boy asked his father, "Can I be brave even when I'm afraid?" And the father said to his son, "It's only when you're afraid that you can be brave at all. It's only when you're afraid that you can be brave at all." It's not a matter of fear or courage. It's not either or. As people of faith, we need to learn how to take either or options and translate them into both and. It's not a matter of being afraid or being courageous. It's only through our fear that we can find our courage. It's both and. It's one of the biggest differences between how we start to live and think as a people of faith and how the world teaches us to live and think. Very often, maybe you don't hear this as often as I do, but in the world, very often I will hear people say, "I consider myself to be a spiritual person, but I'm not religious." Have you heard that? There's a particular pastor in Colorado who I heard at a conference one time say, "Oh yeah, well I'm religious, but I'm not spiritual." I got a good laugh from the audience, and I was like, I don't know if that's good. They're not opposites. These aren't actually enemies to one another. It's not a matter of choosing between being religious or being spiritual. Religion and spirituality are two sides of the same faith. We actually need them both in big ways. Sacraments like baptism remind us that our faith is about both religion and spirituality. We have our spirituality that tells us we are loved, we are whole, we are claimed by God. And by using water to represent God's pervasiveness, we say that there is something beyond these bodies, something beyond this physical world. We turn to the Spirit, we turn to God just the same way we turn to water when we need a chance to be renewed, replenished, whenever this world would deplete us. It's a very spiritual thing that we do with baptism. It's also an incredibly religious thing that we do. The very word religion simply means to do again, to do over. Religion, the R-E in religion, tells us that what this is, it's about reconnecting, re-performing, renewing over and over again. Being religious with something simply means that you're going to do it over and over again. It's why we gather here once a week. Every week we come in to renew our covenant with God, to remember who we are, renew, reconnect. Healthy religion is nothing more than a container for the water of spirituality. As a religious people, we have built containers. We have built a structure, a framework. We've provided buildings and fonts and bowls and vases so that when it comes time to introduce someone to the Spirit of God, we have ways of holding that Spirit, holding a place for that spirituality. Do you see how they're both? Do you see how we need both? Religion teaches us about devotion, commitment, how to renew our covenant with God. Spirituality is the discovery of hope in hopeless times. Spirituality is walking into certain death and realizing that life goes on. Religion reminds us that we were put on this earth to love the Lord our God, to love our neighbors as ourselves. Spirituality teaches us to love someone who we did not think we could love. The same way that there is no courage without fear, there can be no embodiment of spirit without religion. We often turn to religion for assurances, to help buoy us up when we're living in a world that gives us constant reasons to fear. If you're not afraid, if you've never experienced fear in your life, you aren't paying attention. The same could be said of spirituality. If you don't have a sense of spirit in your life, it means you are unaware of what God is doing in your life and in the lives of others right now, today, in this moment. Religion without spirituality is a lot like a museum. It's beautiful, it's interesting, but it's something to be observed from afar rather than participated in. We need both. We need a sense of spirit that leads us, and we need a container to hold the spiritual energy, the spiritual discoveries we make in this world, so that we can embody the Spirit together. Are you with me? Is this making sense? We need both. I think very often that those of us who come to church religiously, week after week, time and time again, I think that most of us do it because this is the one place in our life that can hold us together while everything else seems to be falling apart. And I think most people we meet who would describe themselves as spiritual but not religious, I believe their lives have fallen apart already. And they have yet to find a container, a discipline, a community that can help bring the structure needed to pull the pieces back together. We often come to religion in good times, when we are ready to try something new, when we're starting a family, when we want to put down roots in a new community, when we're ready for an adventure, when we're looking to build ourselves up and build up our lives. I think that's when a lot of us end up dedicating ourselves to religion. That's certainly how it was in the time of Joshua. When the ancient Israelites had conquered the land, when God handed the land of Canaan from the native people over to the Israelites, Joshua, their general, gathered all the leaders in Israel together at a town called Shechem. And Joshua called all these men, they were all the leaders of the community, so at the time they were all men. He called all these men together at Shechem. They represented all the different tribes of Israel. And Joshua said to them this. Joshua said, "Now that God has handed this land over from your enemies to you, this land that comes fully prepared with villages and towns already created, with infrastructure, things that you didn't have to build for yourself, God has provided it all for you. Now that God has done this, do you want to renew your covenant with God?" It was high times. It was the best of times. It was the dawn of a new era. And so, of course, all the men gathered there and said, "Yes, we will love and serve our God." And Joshua said, "Hold on. You need to remember that this is a God with a very long memory. This is a God who does not forget. This is a God who offered a covenant to Abraham, who dwelt in prison with Joseph, who freed your people from Egypt, who wandered with us, your elderly leaders, through the desert. I, Joshua, and these other elders here, we're the last to have been in the wilderness with Moses and the people. And now God has delivered this land to you from your enemies. You have done nothing for yourselves ever. God has done it all. Do you promise to renew your covenant with this God?" And all the men said, "Yes, of course we do." And Joshua said, "Hang on. Wait, because I need to tell you. If you break this covenant, if you forget these promises, God will do evil to you, just as God has done good to you. If you want, right now, you can walk away. You can serve any other god. You can create your own idols. You can live life however you want. But at this moment, if you choose to renew this covenant with God, God will remember. What do you say?" And perhaps a little more soberly, a little more calmly, the men said, "Yes. Yes, we choose to renew this covenant with our God." And they built a monument. They erected a large stone as a way of marking this covenant. They created a nation out of this covenant. They created a religion. They created a whole land filled with holy sites and monuments. It was the best of times. And on his deathbed, Joshua offered one last blessing, which was also a warning to the people Israel. On his deathbed, Joshua said, "Have strength, have courage. almost as if Joshua himself knew that times would not always be good, that success would not always be guaranteed, that promises would not always be easy to make or easy to keep. It's almost as if Joshua knew. And so he blessed them and he wished them strength and courage, just as he and the other elders passed away. We know that life is not always easy times. We know that there are moments in history and moments in our own lives when success is not guaranteed, when times are not high times. We know that. The Bible knows that too. And that's why we also have a story in the Bible not about religion but about spirituality. And it's found just a couple pages after the story I just told you. It's a story that's for these exact moments in life, for the spiritual side of our faith. Stories about ordinary folks facing extraordinary circumstances. And that's a story that goes like this. Just a few generations after the men made their covenant with God, there were two women living to the north of Israel in a land called Moab. Their names were Naomi and Ruth, and they were facing certain death. See, there had been a famine in Israel, and so Naomi and her husband took their two sons, and they left Israel to go start a new farm in Moab, in the neighboring country. And they survived. They did well. And the two boys grew up to take on wives of their own. They took wives from Moab. One of them married a woman named Orpah. The other married a woman named Ruth. If they had been living in Israel, this marriage would have been frowned upon. It would have been unseemly to marry from outside the family. But they were migrants. They were immigrants. They were doing the best they could with what they had. So they married Orpah and Ruth, and the family thrived and survived and did well until tragedy struck, and Naomi's husband died, and both of Naomi's sons died too. And in the wake of these tragic deaths, Naomi took her daughters-in-law to her side, and she said, "Daughters, listen. I have nothing to give you. We live in a world that calls women property. I can't own property. I can't do anything by myself. I have no men to care for me. I have no sons to offer you. Go. You have to go back home to your families. Beg them to take you back. See if they can find new husbands for you. It's the only way to survive. You have to go. I myself will go back to Israel and beg my own people to take me back. I would take you with me, but you are strangers, and I fear for your safety. You have to go back home, and I pray that God has mercy on you." And Orpah wept and said goodbye to her mother-in-law, goodbye to her sister, and she went back home to seek safety. But Ruth refused to go. Ruth clung to the hand of Naomi and said, "Mother, I love you too much. I will not leave you. Where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Where you die, I will die. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." And Naomi knew that she could not dismiss this woman. So Naomi and Ruth, two women who did not have anything to give to one another. Two women who had nothing to rely on, two women who had no idea what the future held. They held one another's hands, and they walked together back to Israel. They were looking for hope in a completely hopeless situation. The only hope they had left was that Israel might remember their covenant, remember the covenant that they made with God to love their neighbor as themselves. And so courageously and with great love and many tears, Naomi and Ruth returned to Israel to find their fate. This morning we all participated in something that was very religious and deeply spiritual. By baptizing this young one into our community, we all made a promise. Each of us made a promise to one another, to our God, and it's a promise we make over and over again. I'll remind you of the promise we made, just in case you forgot. Do you, who witness and celebrate the sacrament, promise your love, support, and care to the one about to be baptized, as she lives and grows in Christ? If so, please say, "We will with the help of God." In witnessing Ellery's baptism, we reaffirmed our own baptisms, our own covenants with God. And from this day on, it is our responsibility to be led by the Spirit together, to love, support, and care for all who share this path of faith, wherever the path may lead. Where she goes, we have promised to go. Where you live, I have promised to live. Your people will be my people, and your God is my God. Religion gives us the structure to make love real in this world. Spirituality gives us the courage to bring that love to those who need it most. Religion teaches us how to cling to life, life in all circumstances, even in death itself. And spirituality teaches us who else we need to cling to, who we need to bring into this life of ours. Friends, we are not living in the best of times. We are not living at a moment when life seems easy, when success guaranteed, when promises are abundant and kept. We are living in a world that teaches us to fear each and every day. A world that seems to be running out of reasons to hope. Thanks be to God for the folks who came before us. Thanks be to God for the people who created a religious community, a place, a container, where we can bring our fear, our joys, our concerns, our lives, and be held together when the rest of the world seems to be falling apart. Thanks be to God for their work, their witness, their commitment. Thank you, God. And we also know that there is an abundance of spirituality in this world. If water is our metaphor for spirituality, look what's happening. There are entire parts of the world being covered in water all the time. We are awash, we are flooded, we are underwater. And just as that is happening in our lives, as things are constantly changing and in chaos, we find more and more adult human beings all the time who have a strong belief that life has value, that human life has real meaning and purpose, that there is something beyond these bodies and something beyond the things we can touch and observe. They feel it. They know it. They're looking for a container. They're looking for a discipline, for a way of life. They're looking for people like us who can teach them how to celebrate joy, how to mourn loss and grief, how to be courageous in the face of fear, how to cling to life after death. God has put us in this place to embody the Spirit. Religion teaches us that we are God's hands on earth. It is our job to cling on to the lost and the hopeless in this world. Do we have the spirituality we need? Do we have the courage to cling to those who need us most? The poor, the oppressed, the drug addicted. Can we cling to women who want to be more than just property or victims? Can we cling to men who want to be remembered as something more than just an abuser or an ally? Can we cling to youth who need a vision for a future that they can believe in? Can we cling to veterans and service men and women? Can we cling to the forgotten and the isolated? Can we cling to those who have so much money they forget what it's like to be human? Can we cling to those who have already lost all hope in this world? Do we have the courage to extend our hands to all the neighbors, not just the ones I named, the ones you know, the people who need us? Do we have the courage to cling to them and to say, where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Where you die, I will die. Your people will be my people. My God is your God. Siblings of faith, let us use one hand that God has given us to cling to one another for dear life. And let us extend our other hand out to those who are most in need of us, because we need them too. Courage and strength, my friends. Tears and hope, my friends. Courage and love, my friends. Thanks be to God. And I invite you to